Hello, people. With any luck, my technology is all working and I'm talking live to the world. Hey, world. I'm trying out my new Chiron that's running at the bottom of the screen so people who are tuning in can see what's going on. Looks like I've got a problem with spacing. Let's see if I can fix that. That should help. All right, so let's talk about President Trump's trip. Lots of fun things to talk about. There's just so much to it. First thing that I think you have to notice is the amount of energy that this is creating. Watch even, for example, look at the expression on Benjamin Netanyahu's face when he's with Trump and meeting in public. He just looks like he's having a great time, and there's just all this noise and energy in the room. And when he went to Saudi Arabia, just huge welcome. President of Egypt asked him to join him, said that he has the kind of personality that can make impossible things happen. And apparently I just read an article that said Ivanka is the talk of Saudi Arabia, more so even in some cases than President Trump, because she's so impressive to them, so different, so impressive. And I've got a feeling that the biggest story in the world right now is the one that nobody's telling, which is that you drop Ivanka Trump into Saudi Arabia and let her just stay there on camera for 24 hours. Saudi Arabia is not going to be the same place anymore. She doesn't have to even open her mouth. It's just going to be a different place when she leaves. It might take a while, but you can't unsee Ivanka Trump. So if you're over in Saudi Arabia and you're thinking, hey, maybe we women should have a different kind of life or more to it, Ivanka doesn't have to say a word. She just has to be Ivanka, and the rest is going to happen. That might be the biggest story in the world, because imagine if Islam is modernized. I hate to use that word because it's kind of it's kind of an implied insult. So let me retract modernized and say, if Islam is affected by women having more say and more influence in it, that's probably a safe situation for the world. Let's also talk about how President Trump is totally ruining the life for his critics this week, because as long as he's abroad, the only things you can talk about are the things he's already done, which is news, right? It's sort of still news, but it's not really the new news. So CNN, who of course has to focus on whatever looks bad for President Trump, is literally focusing on the past. So they'll have more articles than, let's say, Fox will, or more episodes and more interviews that are about the Comey investigation and the Russian stuff. But that's all the past. So poor CNN has their main gig is now the past. Yeah, that's like the History Channel. Whereas if you go over to Fox News, and here you don't have to pick a favorite. I'm just objectively saying that, because they have taken sides, I suppose if the presidents were a different party that this would reverse. But over at Fox News, they're reporting on the present and the future. What new agreements could come out of this? They're actually talking about the future. But poor CNN is stuck in the past this week. Now, and it's hard to be stuck in the past after Alan Dershowitz did his interview and just ruined everybody's concept of what was happening. I, among most people apparently, thought that when everybody was throwing around the phrases, obstruction of justice about the Comey firing, that meant that smart people who know the law see an actual crime that has, potentially or actually been committed. But it turns out there is no crime. Even if Trump did everything that he is said to have done, it turns out there's nothing illegal about that because it wasn't in the criminal system yet. It was still in the FBI system, and the FBI works for the president. So unless they discover some whole new thing, which is very possible, but some whole new thing that nobody's talked about, they got nothing left. So the other thing that is fascinating is that now that this trip, which looks like a successful trip, at least in how the media will spin it and how the public will receive it, comes after what looks like responsible adult behavior with North Korea and forcing China to be the primary mover on that. It looks like ISIS is surrounded, and with the help of our frenemies, the Russians, who are more ally than enemy at the moment, it looks like that's under control too. So if you start looking at the international stuff, it's getting tougher and tougher to be a Trump critic because he keeps stringing together things that look like, even if you don't like them, they do look like adult behavior, right? They look like responsible, well-reasoned, even clever behavior. So you have to come back to the stuff that doesn't have anything to do with policies to find a decent criticism of the president, right? Because nobody's criticizing him on taxes, on crime, on education. They might not like all those things or his take on those things, but you're not hearing those criticisms because the big stuff is sort of going okay. You know, the economy is okay, stock market's okay. All right, looking at some of your comments. So Saudi Arabia, here's another interesting thing. Both Saudi Arabia and Israel received the president with, I won't say gifts, but they had pre-negotiated that upon his arrival, they would be doing things that we want them to do, just for arriving. And that's pretty good negotiating, because to get the president of the United States to go to your country as one of the first countries he visits, that's a pretty big deal. Why should he do that for free? He didn't. Best negotiator in the world said, I'm going to come to your country, but you're going to pay something for it. You're going to buy some military equipment, $100 billion or whatever, and there might be some kind of center being set up, and maybe Ivanka's charity. I don't know what that's all about. And then in Israel, apparently Israel has made some fairly substantial goodwill moves in anticipation of Trump's arrival. And then I'm just blown away by the quote from the head of Egypt, who, I guess the president, who said that Trump's personality is the kind that can make impossible things happen. Here's what's important about that. The more people who believe that to be true, and I think that's a growing number of people, right? Because he did become president against everybody's expectations. So it seemed like he's already done the impossible. He only has to do a few more things that looked unlikely, and we're going to start thinking he can do the impossible. And then suddenly, it gives him the power to do the impossible, because he has so much energy that he can harness. He just needs people thinking it's headed in the right direction. And once they start thinking, oh my God, he keeps doing good things, and he's got all this energy, you know, the energy of the people and the media and the energy of attention, that it's going to be pretty interesting. He could get a lot done. Now, anything could happen. He could get derailed by the deep state or whatever. So the other thing I've predicted by tweet is that when President Trump returns, he will have effectively powered up by his overseas trip, you know, unless something changes. But the way it looks now, he's going to come back in his strongest position that he's been in ever, really, in his entire life, but also within the presidency. He'll be coming back at his strongest position. And I think what he's going to do is take care of some leakers. Because, you know, when you clean house and take care of leakers, that's sort of a traumatic thing. And you want a big win as your tailwind to just, you know, make this a clean sweep. So I think he's going to come back with a broom and make some changes, and those changes will go down more easily if we think that overseas was looking good, and it looks that way so far. All right, taking a look at some of your comments here. So one of the fascinating things, and I've never seen, well, maybe somebody's done this. I'd love to see a chart connecting all the players in the news with each other. Because every time there's a story about somebody did something and I look at it and I go, I don't know, it feels like I'm not fully understanding why they do that. Sooner or later, and it usually happens within a couple of weeks, somebody says some version of, well, this person worked for this person who hired that person who was this person's aide and was the clerk for this person. And then you go, oh, well, now it makes perfect sense based on the personal connections. I'd love to see a map that you could click on any individual and it would just bring up all the people they're connected to. Or sort of a Kevin Bacon map, 6 degrees of separation. You click on any 3 people who were in the news and see how they're connected. And they almost always are in Washington, right? Because by the time you become important, in a Washington, D.C. way, you've probably met all the important people in one context or another. So that would be pretty useful. Yeah, I don't think WenHub can do that, but it can do a lot. All right, here's a thought for you. I'm going to go off script for a moment because, I'm not going to do that. Let me stick to politics on this. Is it possible to persuade Saudi Arabia about human rights and to fight ISIS at the same time? Well, I think Trump made the practical and correct business decision here, which is trying to push Saudi Arabia into changing. Might feel good to us, like we might feel like we're doing the right thing, but it gets the psychology wrong. Because compare these two things. All right, just compare these two approaches. One approach is, let's say it's the Obama approach. You give a speech and you say, Saudi Arabia, you must discontinue your terrible practices against women and gays and whatever else is in your speech that you think would make them more like Western values. How's that going to go down? It's not going to go down well, right? So what would be the point of it? If the point is just to make them mad and have them not change in any way whatsoever, well, that would be a good way to go about it. But suppose you wanted them to change, and you were, let's say, a master persuader. Let's say you understood psychology, and you also were good at priorities. Well, first you'd go over there and say, okay, my priority is take care of ISIS. Because once that's done, you have room to do other things, right? You gotta take, pull the arrow out of your chest before you get onto your manicure. So that makes sense. Strategically, he's got the priorities right. But still, we with our Western values are thinking to ourselves, I'm not loving the way they treat women over there. I'm not loving the way they treat, gays and lesbians over there. I think we need to do something about it. So what does President Trump do? He arrives with Ivanka. Now, Melania, too, apparently is, it's a big deal, the whole family, and they get a lot of interest. But according to the article I just read, reporting about what it's like on the ground in Saudi Arabia right now, the talk of the town and the trending news is about Ivanka. And the thing is, here's the persuasion. Ivanka is visual, all right? And in all the right ways, right? She looks both professional and attractive and young and famous and rich and capable and close to the president because she's related, obviously, and working with him. So it's sort of everything you'd want in one package of persuasion. Now, what does Ivanka have to do in order to sell her persuasion to make, let's say, Saudi Arabia a more open society, open for women in particular in this context? What does she have to do? Turns out all she has to do is be Ivanka. Because it turns out, according to the report I read today, simply being Ivanka is just impressive as hell to the women and a lot of the men in Saudi Arabia. So she doesn't have to ask them to change. She just has to be Ivanka. She's probably caused more of a revolution just by showing up than any speech would ever do. So President Trump, by keeping his priorities clear, but also understanding that persuasion works best if it's done subtly, indirectly, and visually. Tell me, what is more visual than Ivanka Trump? Nothing. There is nothing you can tell me that would have more visual appeal in the positive way. A visual thing that was scary would be more powerful, but that doesn't apply to this situation. All right. Yeah, I wouldn't make too much of a big deal about the fact that Saudi Arabia seemed cool with Jared Kushner and with Ivanka, given that Ivanka is converted and Jared is Jewish, because they were just visiting and they came with the president, and I don't think that in particular shows there's some big change. Does he do all this consciously? Well, let me put it this way. Do you think that Ivanka was a necessary advisor to his trip to Saudi Arabia? I mean, really, when you think of all the advisors who would be the right kind of advice for a trip to the Middle East, a place where he probably doesn't know a lot, needs all the help he can get, was Ivanka the expert on the Middle East? No. Was she there because he wanted to bring his daughter because he felt more comfortable, traveling with family? Well, maybe that was a little bit of it, but I'll bet you won't see her on all the trips. So if you ask me, is it a coincidence that the very best persuasion you could ever concoct to change Saudi Arabia in a subtle way that nobody even knows is happening, is it a coincidence that the best master persuader, the most persuasive branding expert of our lifetime, coincidentally did exactly the right thing, the most powerful thing he could have done in this situation? Maybe. I mean, it could be as simple as he wanted to bring his daughter because it was going to be a memorable trip like no other trip. It could have been just that. But I have to think that there's always another layer on this. She could have done more. No, she could have said more, but it would have done less. That's my point, is that the verbal persuasion is weak, the visual is strong. And she brings such a strong visual persuasion to the game that it makes all the other stuff unimportant. Getting her to sub in for a speech elevates her. Did she sub in for a speech? Did that happen? If it hasn't happened, you're right. That would be an interesting thing to do. How about Melania? She was oozing sex. Well, when Melania dresses up, how are you not going to think she's attractive? I mean, I don't. I think I like the fact that she didn't try to turn it off. She just said, "I'm going to do what I always do. I'm going to be me." Yeah, that's a good point. You're saying that Saudi Arabia likely has wanted to rebrand, and this trip might give them what I call the fake because, it just gives them the reason or the little extra nudge to do it. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know much about the new leader. I don't know how much of a reformer he is, or I guess I don't have enough insight into their culture to know if that makes sense. But it smells right? It passes the sniff test. They probably do want to change because everybody wants to change somehow. Trump might have caught the leakers. I think it's fair to say that everyone close to the White House probably knows who the leakers are at this point. Yeah. If you're following the news, you know too, because it has been reported fairly with great credibility, but not widely reported. Um, all right. So if you have more questions, I'll stay on. If not, I'll be heading off to get some other things done. By the way, how do you like my Chiron? Does it make this more? I'm going to work on it. There's a whole bunch more I can do to make it look like an actual news. The Chiron is this thing that's going by here. All right, I'm going to do a little test while you're on here. I'm going to see what happens if I change it on the fly. Oh, I can do it on the fly. How about that? All right, cool to know. All right, I'm going to sign off from now. Looks like we're out of questions. We've done enough here. All right.